In the late 1970s, the world of home video games was a chaotic, fragmented landscape, ruled by one name, Atari. Their video computer system, the legendary Atari 2600, had brought the arcade experience into millions of living rooms, defining an entire generation of digital play with its joystick and blocky, abstract graphics. But while Atari dominated the quantity of the market, a rival was quietly preparing a machine designed to dominate the quality, a console that promised not just games but intelligent television. This was the Mattel Intellivision. Mattel, the global toy giant famous for Barbie and Hot Wheels, saw the burgeoning video game market not just as a passing fad, but as a new technological frontier. Their goal was audacious: to create a home system that was technically superior to the 2600 in every measurable way, shifting the consumer focus from simple, fast-paced fun to deeper, more realistic and complex experiences. Released nationwide in 1980, the Intellivision launched the first true console war in history. It was a battle waged not just on the sales floor, but in the most aggressive advertising campaign the young industry had ever seen. A high-stakes game that would temporarily elevate Mattel to the status of a major electronics power, introduce the world to the secretive heroes known as the Blue Sky Rangers, and ultimately, crash and burn in the devastating economic collapse of 1983. This is the story of the Intellivision, the machine that was too smart, too complicated, and perhaps too far ahead of its time. Mattel's entry into electronics began not with consoles, but with handheld games. In 1977, the same year the Atari VCS launched, Mattel Electronics released its successful line of portable LED sports games, proving they had the engineering chops for microprocessors. This success paved the way for a full home console. Engineering for the Intellivision began in 1978. The team's primary directive was simple: beat Atari. To do this, they needed a technical edge. While the Atari 2600 was built around the relatively simple 8-bit MOS technology 6507 processor, a simplified derivative of the more commonly known 6502, Mattel chose a significantly more powerful and complex piece of silicon: the General Instrument's CP1610. The 1610, often referred to as a 16-bit processor, though technically a 16-bit accumulator/register set with a 10-bit instruction word, was a powerhouse for its time. Running at nearly 1 MHz, it was capable of handling maths and logic far more efficiently than its rival. This superior processing power translated directly into the console's most immediate and marketable advantage: graphics. The Intellivision offered a palette of 16 vibrant colors compared to the Atari's mere 8, and boasted a much higher resolution. Crucially, it excelled at character-based graphics. The system utilized playfield tiles, essentially allowing programmers to construct highly detailed backgrounds and realistic sprites by combining numerous small, pre-rendered graphics. This approach was a revelation, particularly for sports simulations. Whereas Atari football featured blocky stick-figure players, the Intellivision's Major League Baseball displayed recognizable, proportionally accurate athletes, running on a detailed diamond. But superior horsepower came with a high cost, not just in manufacturing, but in complexity. The engineers had designed a machine that was capable of amazing things, but it was notoriously difficult to program. Unlike the 2600's simple hardware, where programmers could write 6502 assembly directly addressing the silicon, the Intellivision required extensive, low-level coding to fully utilize its proprietary custom chips. This steep learning curve became a defining characteristic of the system's development story, requiring a special kind of programmer to master it. The retail price reflected this sophistication. At launch, the Intellivision was nearly $300, $100 more than a fully established Atari VCS. It was a premium device for a premium audience. The physical design of the Intellivision was as polarizing as its technical specs. While Atari embraced the simplicity of the single-button, 8-direction joystick, Mattel's controller was a marvel of complexity and ambition. It was a handheld unit, featuring a 12-button numeric keypad, 4 side-mounted action buttons, 2 on each side for ambidextrous play, and, its most distinctive feature, a 16-way directional disc. This flat, circular disc allowed for far greater precision in movement than the Atari joystick, crucial for diagonal movement in sports and maze games. However, it was also criticized for being painful on the thumbs during long play sessions, a point of friction that often overshadowed its technical advantages. Furthermore, Mattel was the first to introduce the concept of controller overlays. These plastic cards slipped over the keypad, providing game-specific labeling for each of the 12 buttons. This allowed for unparalleled complexity in control schemes, giving players access to advanced functions like defense formations in football or specific spells in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. It reinforced the marketing message: this was a sophisticated system for strategic players. But the biggest promise, and the greatest disaster by far, was the keyboard component. From its inception, Mattel pitched the Intellivision not merely as a games console, but as the core of a fully fledged home computer system. The keyboard component was a massive add-on that would theoretically turn the Intellivision into a machine capable of running applications, teaching programming, and competing directly with systems like the Commodore PET and Apple II. Mattel announced it early, hyped it relentlessly, and charged a deposit for pre-orders. Yet, the complex hardware, constant redesigns, and escalating production costs meant the keyboard component was perpetually delayed. Its promised release date slipped from 1979 to 1980, then 1981. It became an industry joke. At the 1981 Mattel Christmas party, comedian Jay Leno reportedly used the keyboard component as the punchline to a joke about the 3 biggest lies. The unit was eventually released in 1982, priced at an astronomical $600, more than the entire games console itself, and only in very limited quantities before being swiftly pulled. The entire failed venture cost Mattel over $10 million and severely damaged the brand's credibility, forcing the company to pivot to the much simpler Entertainment Computer System, or ECS, later on. With superior technology, but a massive price tag and a confusing controller, Mattel needed a compelling narrative in order to compete against Atari's seemingly insurmountable momentum. They found it in an unlikely spokesperson, sports writer, novelist, and actor George Plimpton. Mattel's advertising campaign, spearheaded by Plimpton, was revolutionary for its time, employing a direct, aggressive, and somewhat elitist tone. The ads, broadcast widely across prime-time television, were explicit side-by-side comparisons. Plimpton, often wearing a tuxedo or other professorial attire, would stand between 2 screens running equivalent games, one on the Atari 2600, the other on Intellivision. The message was unambiguous. Plimpton would point to the Atari screen, showing blocky sprites and abstract playfields, calling the games rudimentary and simplistic. Then he would gesture toward the Intellivision, showcasing its relatively smooth animation, detailed sprites, and realistic field layouts, declaring it the closest thing to the real thing. This was the core of Mattel's strategy, marketing the Intellivision as the console for the thinking man, the player who wanted sports simulations that required strategy and geometry, not just button-mashing reflexes. The comparison was devastatingly effective because the technical gap was real. Intellivision football looked like football. Atari football looked like colored rectangles, wandering aimlessly across a nondescript green field. The campaign worked. By 1982, the Intellivision had captured over 20% of the burgeoning North American home video games market, having sold over 2 million units. Mattel Electronics was now a serious industry player, reporting staggering profits that rivaled even those of their toy division, the historic core of their revenues. Recognizing the immense install base of the Atari 2600, at the time, around 10 million units, Mattel launched the M-Network label in 1982. This was a tactical maneuver, enabling them to release versions of their most popular Intellivision titles, like Astro Smash and Armor Battle, for their competitors' console. To prevent the simpler, less detailed 2600 ports from cannibalizing the Intellivision's image as the superior machine, they often changed the game titles, like Astro Smash becoming Astro Blast. This move showed Mattel's ruthless business acumen, maximizing revenue by operating on both sides of the console war they themselves had started. The Battle of the Bits had truly begun, setting the stage for every console rivalry that followed. This brings us to the end of Part 1. In Part 2, we'll dive behind the corporate walls to meet the secretive group of developers known as the Blue Sky Rangers, the coding heroes whose identities had to be guarded from rivals. We'll explore the groundbreaking games they created, introduce the mind-blowing but commercially flawed IntelliVoice speech module, and ultimately witness the spectacular video game crash of 1983, a market collapse that nearly killed the entire industry and forced Mattel to abandon the very machine they had so intelligently designed.
Thank you for watching. If you like me, you could press that button. Subscribe if you want to. And I will see you next time.